Trident Wargaming. Build it, paint it, play it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Trident Wargaming Podcast, the official podcast of the Age of Sigmar Trident Wargaming Slow Grow. And we're really excited to talk this week specifically about Age of Sigmar. And if I could say anything about it specifically, I think it would be that it is the game I wish 40k was. And if I can't convince you why you should try it this week, you got to come out and play a game. But before we get into that topic on why it's the greatest game, mechanically with rules or via lore, we are going to have a little bit of a preamble ramble, and we're going to play some Marry, Fuck, Kill. So here are the rules of the game. Daniel, you're going to go first, and then Aiden, you're going to go second. But I guess I should introduce our guest on the show before we even get into that. We are joined with Daniel Schneider, also known as, is it Smashed Head Art or?
Yeah, Smashed Head Studios. There's too many Daniels out there. So.
Smashed Head Studios. He's I guess famous for his art on Age of Sigmar, but other than that, he is a local Age of Sigmar community leader. And we're also joined today with Mr. Aiden Vollmer, a new Age of Sigmar community member and 40k veteran.
That I am. Hi, guys.
So, Marry, Fuck, Kill. Everyone kind of knows the game, but if you've never played it before, we're going to give a selection of 3. You have to choose to marry one, fuck one, and, kill one. So our first one, Daniel, this one goes to you, is Alarielle the Everqueen, Morathi, and Kragnos.
Alarielle, Morathi, Kragnos. Okay. Marry Alarielle because she's a nice lady. She's got great gams. If you've seen the models, she's got great gams. She looks cuddly. Her beetle looks like a delight, like a giant Labrador beetle. Very wifey material. And then Morathi would probably be the fuck. Because I feel like, with her experience as a dark elf, that's very Slaanesh adjacent. It's going to be a good time. But you don't want to stick around forever, because she's going to turn on you. And Kragnos is just... I just imagine a battering ram, and so that doesn't appeal to me in any way. And he hates dragons, so that dude can get the heck out of here. Plus, he's not a Beast of Chaos model, so he can get the heck out of here, too.
Yeah, that's no good. All right, Aiden, this one goes to you. Marry, Fuck, Kill, Gods of Chaos edition. So we got Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Tzinch. Frankly, just because Khorne is too obvious.
Right, okay. So I'm not going to go with, I think, the obvious answer of fucking Slaanesh. I think that might turn bad very quickly. So I think I'm going to kill Slaanesh. I think Nurgle's all about, commitment. So I think marrying Nurgle makes a lot of sense, right? You have that for the long term. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to get a lot of what you want out of Slaanesh, I think, without the unhappy ending with Tzeentch. So I think I'm going to go with Tzeentch for that.
You might get like a mutation.
Yeah, maybe, but that's fine. That's fine. Who doesn't have one nowadays?
All right, last one is Death Edition. So I'll throw it to both of you. I'm kind of curious if you're gonna agree or disagree on this. So it is Marry, Fuck, Kill, Lady Olander, Lady Annika, and Belladamma Volga.
I'll let you go first, Aiden.
Sure. Okay. So Belladamma is my lady, but I'm pretty sure that wolf she's riding is her husband. So we're gonna be respectful of that. And maybe murder? And maybe kill her. I think Lady Annika, I don't know too much about her, but she is not the most cuddly looking person. So maybe we'll fuck her and get over with it. And then Lady Olander, I think we're going to marry because she's, I don't know, there forever, I suppose. Same thing with Nurgle.
She has the wedding veil, right? She's got the gown.
Yeah, I guess. She's already ready to go.
Well, I'm never going to...
I'm going to...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was gonna go opposite of Aiden. Like Oleander is way too much baggage. Like there's just way too much there. So kill her. She's just whiny and has a lot going on. So I don't want to deal with that.
Age of Stormcast Eternal like a million years or something like that too? Like, you really want to go through that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Annika, I agree with Aiden on Annika. I'm gonna fuck her. She's got the little mask, so it's a little coy, a little mysterious. I like that. She's creative with her hair. So she's adventurous. So yeah, there's a lot of good positives there. And then Belladama, she's just like who wouldn't want to marry someone that is basically going to be a grandma that cooks you cupcakes and muffins. At least that's what I choose to believe, so that I can enter into that marriage on a positive note.
All right, I'm actually going to. We're gonna marry Belladama Volga. I think that she's gonna take care of you. She's got that motherly instinct, and I think that's kind of what you want. I'm gonna kill Lady Annika because I don't trust that vampire not to suck my blood. And I'm gonna fuck Lady Olander because I want to try out what that ghost is, So we're gonna go through that. But Ghostosy aside, what we're really here to talk about is Age of Sigmar. Our first topic today is just like a round table about Age of Sigmar, but specifically it's not game mechanic related. That's topic 2. So the very first thing, we got a Slogro coming up. There's a lot of people who have a lot of interest in it. And I think people come to this game for a variety of different reasons. So my first question, and we'll start at Aiden here because he's newer to it, and then we'll go to Daniel after, is like, what is the big draw of Age of Sigmar to you? Like, not game mechanic wise. What's the people? Like, what's the appeal? For anyone who's Age of Sigmar curious out there in the wild, like why have you come to it? And what is GW doing well to kind of make you want to come to it?
Yeah, so I think the obvious answer is the model range, right? Like, you have in fantasy and kind of an undetermined aesthetic that 40K has. You can kind of go anywhere with it, and we've seen that since AOS launched. That's why I think like a lot of the more popular like higher end painting YouTubers, like we're talking like Vince V, like Miniac, even like Cult of Paint, I think are all also like Age of Sigmar players. And they kind of lend towards that system. Like, I know Vince talks all the time about how he isn't the biggest fan of 40K as a game, and he can paint a model every once in a while, but like AOS is where you want to go if you want depth and choice, right? Okay. And so I think that's like the big draw. I think a lot of people, like especially like hobby focused people, tend towards being AOS curious, like a lot of us in the community are. Like I have been for about a year now, but just don't have the opportunity because of maybe your community's not on it yet, or maybe everyone's confused about the system, or maybe the system's just complicated at the time. Don't have like a good way in to getting on top of those models. So I think, going back to the Slogro, I think this is a great opportunity for people to kind of expand their hobby skill set, I suppose, beyond painting power armor and explore other textures, explore more complicated models, as well as, just learning the game.
I wonder to what extent, like the brighter fantasy themed colors is part of what makes it more of an appealing system, like for people who like to paint, for people who like art. If it's more fun to play with those like elf colors or those bright colors, like even what normally a lot of lines like the scale line calls their fantasy colors, if that's what it is, rather than that grimdark metallic setting of like Necrons are this dark color and Space Marines come in this saturated primary. And Tyranids are this dark primary kind of thing. Dan, what's your thought? What's the draw? Do you agree with Aiden that it's mostly just like a fantastic model range with like wonderful colors and people who are aspiring artists? Does it go deeper than that?
For me, that's a big part of it. There's two things though that are really big for me, which is both the models and the lore. The lore really grabbed me first. And then the models kind of like, because when I jumped in, it was still really early 2nd edition. So we had some of the model ranges were gorgeous, like just beyond gorgeous. That's when the Night Haunt had first dropped.
And then some of the model ranges are clan rats.
Yeah. Yeah, and even at that time, like, my two main armies are Seraphon and Beasts of Chaos. And Seraphon at that time were like, oh, we've got one really cool big dinosaur, and everyone else is real old and doofy looking. So it was the lore that got me in a big time. And then the model range is, like, pretty much would be just echoing everything that Aiden said. But after that, for me, it was what really got me to stick around and actually keep playing the game beyond just like, because as an artist, I love the models and I love painting them and I love converting them and I love kit bashing them. What got me to stick around and kept it as my favorite game is the rules, because it just feels like fun comes first. There's constantly this like emphasis on having just wild, crazy fun.
You know, I remember, I think that was part of their original game design, because when they first released the first edition of Age of Sigmar, they did have some silly rules in there. And I wonder if that has caused, like, for some people not to cause that jump, because they remember that as that silly system where if you got up and danced, you got some special things. But maybe from its inception, what they were trying to do was not have that cutthroat style of system that, you know, their other major game system does have sometimes, and some people consider it a problem. Whether that's a problem or not, I think depends on whether you have that pre-game conversation and you know, that agreement, that social contract of what you're getting into. But if the game is designed from the ground up to be played in a different way, it might kind of alleviate that problem. But both of you did hit on something I want to talk about as well, is lore. Age of Sigmar, actually, I loved Warhammer Fantasy. I got in it, the same edition, they killed it about like a year before. And by the time I was ready with my fully painted Wood Elf army, the game was dead. And I got in at like the end times, which was a wild time. The people tell me that was not Warhammer Fantasy. But like, I thought it was wild. The story was progressing, it was crazy. And then I watched Age of Sigmar come out and I was upset because my models felt like they were invalid. But I loved that old fantasy lore. And I loved how in Age of Sigmar or Warhammer Fantasy at the time, they weren't afraid to kill characters off. And there was lineages, like Manfred von Karstein was dead. And now, you know, Manfred von Karstein was in charge, and he was a fucking badass. Or, like, it didn't really matter who. Or, I think Karl Franz died and came back as a god. But there was an established canon. And as I come into Age of Sigmar, I love seeing, like, especially reading the Lumineth stuff, some of this lore come in. Like, you know, I mean, Teclis and some of these other people are old Warhammer Fantasy souls. And they completely address the fact that they were alive back then, or that they've come through, and they start bringing other, you know, bits and pieces. And it doesn't feel like it's cheesily done. It feels like a callback and a reward for someone with a bit of experience for some of this, you know, old forbidden knowledge. So my question to you, and we'll start with Daniel, and then we'll go to Aiden here for this, is what is your favorite bit of lore about Age of Sigmar right now? Like, if there's one piece of lore you could share that you think is, like, the coolest thing. Like, so for example, for me, is I love the this great fall that the Lumineth experience, how they kind of wrote that in there for as like a what the hell were they doing for the first 2,000 years or however long the first two ages. And I love how that's a mirror of, you know, that 40k setting, but also like a Tolkien setting. And it makes me wonder, if we take a look at fantasy as a whole, if elves are best written in like a post-empire sort of way, on the decline, when they're no longer at their best and they're struggling with what we would call, you know, their humanity. But your favorite lore, Daniel?
So I'm going to try and pick one moment out of this, but basically my favorite part of the Sigmar lore is that it's this tragedy, it's this comedy of tragedies, and it's all because pretty much every character is incredibly flawed and petty, except for the one straight man in the entire universe, which in 40k our straight man is basically Gilliman, who is just looking at the insanity going like, why is everyone crazy, and trying to like balance that. And in Sigmar, your straight man is Archaon, which is incredible, an awesome way to look at it. Like, Archaon is the only guy that is just walking around like, why is everyone so incompetent and petty and flawed, and just like, I just want to do my plans and everyone ruins it. So like, my favorite probably pettiness moment is kind of two parts. I'll try and keep it tight. Is loved recently, like Nagash is the ultimate king of petty. Everything he does in this setting is just him trying to jealously get one up on everyone else. The Osiarch Bone Reapers are a one up on the Stormcast Eternals. Like, he creates the Necroquake, the Black Pyramid, in order to just, like, screw over Sigmar because he's pissed at him for taking some of his souls. But then his whole plan, like, as this plan is going on, it's one of my favorite parts in the lore is the three Chaos Gods that are basically free at this point, which is Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch, because Slaanesh has been trapped by the Elf Gods. The three of them are like, hey, we gotta do something. Us three Chaos Gods that are left, we gotta do something. And the whole time, basically, while they're discussing this and figuring out what they need to do to stop Slaanesh, or stop Nagash, is you have basically the Great Horned Rat, who is canonically now the fifth Chaos God in Age of Sigmar, is sitting outside a window, basically, staring at them, going like, hey, I'm here. I'm right here. Like, why are none of you including me in this meeting of the Chaos Gods? And they constantly treat him like this redheaded stepchild of Age of Sigmar and their Chaos Gods. And no one ever acknowledges him. And he's so pissed about it that he will do anything to just ruin everyone else's life until they acknowledge him. And I just love that. Like, that's like a perfect bit of like what makes Sigmar so good is that because of their flaws and their pettiness, no one will ever accomplish anything of great worth because someone will do something stupid just to spite everyone else. Teclis could have done something great, but he was so petty in trying to prove that he was better than Nagash that he goes and basically shoves him into a locker like a nerd and is like, yeah, I'm the best at magic. While Alariel is like, hey, there was a bigger problem that your brother's dealing with and you're going off and showing off that you're like supreme magic guy for no reason at all. And so it's just like that constant ongoing thread of the story makes me so happy and I love it.
What is this bigger problem that you speak of in like, because I'm reading the lore and there's rumors that that his brother Tyrion is doing other shit, and I'm like, are they going to release some Tyrion elves attached to the Lumineth? Stop! I can only get so hard.
Basically, yeah. Like, and that's another thing that I love about the lore with Sigmar is they tease things a lot. So the Ideneth Deepkin were teased a lot before they were released. So they were teased a lot in the lore. Same thing with the Caradron Overlords. They were teased in the lore before their release. And then same thing with the Sons of Bahamut. Sons of Bahamut was like such a long tease. And they've been teasing two other armies, majorly teasing two other armies. One of them is the Chaos Dwarfs, but the other one is Malarian's elves. And Malarian he's the god of shadow now. He was formerly Malekith from fantasy. And he's considered probably the most powerful of the elf gods.
Well, he was chosen as their at the end of the when the world was breaking in the old fantasy thing. Like, he ended up being the prophecy foretold, essentially, right? I don't remember how exactly they called it.
Phoenix Lord.
The Phoenix Lord.
Yeah. And yeah, he's been very just kind of off quietly doing his own thing. Every once in a while, he gives aid to everyone. He gave Sigmar this arena to train his Stormcast in, but there's a little hidden secret in there that he hid the fact that he can now watch what happens with the Stormcast the whole time from that arena. So it's the arena for Sigmar to train his greatest champions in, but Malarian kind of hid a secret hidden cam in there so that he can keep tabs on what Sigmar is doing the whole time. And that's kind of hinted at what Tyrion is doing, is that he is probably dealing with Malarian because Malarian is now the god of shadows. So who better to be doing something very devious behind the scenes than probably Malarian?
I love that, and I'm really hoping we'll see eventually one day a Tyrion and the high elf units that accompany him. I hope that what you were leading at with the Skaven and their god is like this fifth chaos god, and in some Warhammer settings they do have that fifth chaos god as like the god of actual chaos, not dedicated to one thing but just dedicated to completely fucking everything all the time, and that makes perfect sense for Skaven. Aiden, what is your favorite little tidbit of Warhammer lore, and why is it what I'm thinking Daniel perfectly set you up for?
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some foundational AOS stuff. Assuming that everybody listening to this isn't as well versed as maybe Dan is. The second edition started with this event called the Necroquake, which was, to my understanding, unbelievably important for the realms as a whole, right? Each realm in AOS has something called Realmstone. It changes, I believe, between realm to realm. So like for your Lumineth, Arthur, that's where they get the Aether Quartz, right? That is the realm stone of the realm of life. And then to contrast that in the realm of death and Shyish, there's a stuff called grave sand, right? Which obviously takes the form of sand. It's concentrated death magic. It messes up everybody that it touches. Like you mentioned earlier about that Stormcast guy that Lydia Linder aged, 1,000 years or whatever in a second. That was the effect of grave sand, right? So it's potent stuff if it can do that to, one of Sigmar's finest. So Nagash had a great plan. He wanted to, while winking at everybody and being like, I'm not such a bad guy or whatever, he enacted this millennia-long plan to concentrate all of the grave sand in Shyish into one point. And so what he noticed was, a skeleton goes up, it picks up a pouch of grave sand, it disintegrates, not good, right? A skeleton could only really travel about a single grain of grave sand at a time. So what he did was he amassed as many skeletons as he possibly could, and grain by grain, he would transport all of the grave sand from across the realm into one point in Shyish, right in the middle-ish. All was good. Everything was going great until this clan of Skaven that had been chilling, kind of doing Skaven things under one of the cities, dug a tunnel into where all of this grave sand was being hoarded, this big old hole. And that caused the Necroquake. Nagash, might tell you, oh, no, it was my grand plan or whatever to unleash the Night Haunt on the realms, but really it was the Skaven. It was completely an accident. And I think that is more than anything the most like old school 40k lore thing that I've heard so far is, there's this great deity, they have all these plans or whatever, but these fucking rats come along and ruin everything, and it's just the right amount of silly.
There's other throwbacks too, like Teclis after his battle with Nagash, trying to essentially have who's got the biggest wizard penis of all time, ends up getting wounded as a god by Nagash, and it still hurts him for quite some time. And anyone who remembers Teclis in Warhammer Fantasy, who was one of the greatest mages of all time, he was like perpetually sickly, right? He had to take constant potions, and he was frail, and his brother always had to fight for him. And they're kind of teasing at that too. He's mortally or immortally rather wounded, and he's not as powerful as he once could be because of this thing. I love how it all ties together. I like how all three of us have kind of had something that is all centered around, I guess Nagash here being a central character.
He's pretty
which
important.
Maybe he should be with that fucking gorgeous model.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I cut you off, Aiden.
Oh, no, I was just saying, as he probably should be, right? Like, he's one of the big, less so, I guess, in third, but he's one of the big movers and shakers, so I'm glad there's a lot surrounding him in the what's this age called, Dan? The current one?
So we're still,
this is the Age of
I guess
Sigmar,
we're in,
right? There's nothing more specific?
Yeah, like we're kind of coming into the era of the beast is what they're calling it now. So I think I can't remember if we've officially changed from the Age of Sigmar. I think it's still technically Age of Sigmar because there's like different subsections of the Age of Sigmar. The first one was the Realm Gate Wars. That's what opened up the Age of Sigmar. And then we had the era of the Necroquake, and now we're coming into the era of the beast.
Right, and it's nice
which
that we
is
have...
Alariel. Oh, sorry.
No, that's really okay. It's just nice that we have like a contemporary understanding of Nagash for newer players, and we're not just drawing on what was established, 20 years ago or whatever. These characters, like probably Techless, I don't know, but probably Techless, and for sure Nagash, keep being reinvented in the narrative. It's really good for, I think, connecting quote unquote fantasy or old world players and newer players.
I was listening to a podcast that I actually really love. It's the Miniac podcast where him and Ninjon talk every 2 weeks, and they're both Age of Sigmar enthusiasts. They were one of the reasons why I wanted to get into it. They were kind of selling it, but also they're great painters, and it's kind of a hobby focused podcast. If you've never tried that, try that out. It's called Trapped Under Plastic. And they were talking about how I guess it was Ninjon's critique that Age of Sigmar doesn't have a mature lore, and they're hoping it's going to get better. I think all of us here are going to fundamentally disagree with that because the lore is already fucking good.
Absolutely, that's one of the big things they tell you about horror, which kind of loosely maps onto the grimdark thing that GW tries to do. Is you have to have moments of levity, and that is unbelievable. Orcs are a great example, right? You have this world in 40k, at least they have this world of everybody's dying, nobody's life is good, people are eating recycled compost effectively of their hive mates, and then you have the orcs where there is not a single serious story about the orcs, and that makes everything the grimdark aspect of it so much more, right? If you just have constant noise, you can't really discern what the gravity of each story is without that.
Final comments about lore, Daniel?
Pretty much kind of going on that is that what I love about Sigmar is the contrasts make each other better. Things like the Lumineth are one of the best examples, where the Lumineth on their surface are these super shiny, when you look at them, you're just they're inspirational, they're aspirational, you want to be like them. You look at them and you're those guys are cool. And then you hear the lore about how they fell, and Teclis's arrogance and Teclis's basically inhumanity in leading to what the Ideneth became, and now how he's going down a different, possibly worse path to make sure that the Lumineth don't become what the Ideneth became. And then you see what the Lumineth do with humans that come into their cities, and how they treat humanity and treat anyone that is not them. They are they're this very sinister type of xenophobic, and it really contrasts against that shininess that you see on the surface. So those contrasts in the lore, to me, make it more interesting, where stuff like the Gloomspike gets. It's silly. They don't know how to make bottles, so they like to go and collect bottles as a form of currency, which is just weird and ludicrous. But then also, how does the Loon King get all of these great prophecies that lead him to great advantages in battle? Oh, he collects wizards and basically breeds them as human mushrooms that he feeds horrible concoctions to, and keeps them high as a kite while they're growing mushrooms and fungus out of their heads so that they can babble prophecies to him. That's horrifying.
I didn't even know about that one. I knew about the Lumineth, but I didn't know about that one. Wild. All right. Last bit, roundtable, is just sell me your current faction you're playing. What is the coolest aspect of the faction that someone who is AOS curious might not know? So, lore-wise, art-wise, and even here I would you can throw in if one of those lore things or art things includes a mechanic on the tabletop to go with it, and that's yeah, you love that, that's really part of it, you can throw that in there too. We'll go back to Daniel here, and then we'll go to Aiden afterwards. So sell me some, maybe Beast of Chaos, maybe Seraphon, I'm not sure, but sell me it. What's the draw? Why do you love them?
Quick sell on Seraphon. They're big dinosaurs. Why don't who doesn't love big dinosaurs? But they're also masters of magic, which is really cool. And then one of the things that I love about that is their play style represents that really well. There's really 4 ways to play them, and each is vastly different from the other. And they do this really cool thing with the new Slan model is one of my favorite examples of this. Is every little Easter egg on the Slan model has a mechanic in the game that can be used and is also a tie back to their old lore, because they're technically the oldest characters in Sigmar. So that's really cool. But my favorite faction to sell people on is the Beasts of Chaos. Beasts of Chaos are so cool. They're like, to sell them in the serious way, they're a monster faction. If you love monsters and you love like horrors and stuff like that, they're great. It's big giant minotaurs, it's big giant like chimeras, it's these cockatrices like bullgores, these gores that are like cool and disgusting, razor gores. They're really cool, and they can be any kind of animal. Like, you think of a beast man of any type, like a tiger person, a shark person, armadillo person, whatever. You can make that into a beast man. But the reason I really, really, really love them is Beasts of Chaos are the hipsters of chaos. They are the OG chaos guys. They were the first chaos in the mortal realms before the chaos gods, and they really judge you for the way that you like chaos, because they enjoyed chaos before chaos was cool and hip. And they think it's really lame of you to follow one chaos god, so much so that they will beat and like basically exile any beast of chaos that falls to one of the 4 chaos gods from their herds, because they're like, that's not chaotic of you to follow Khorne. It's not chaotic to choose one path of chaos. Get out of here. Like, they are sitting there in their like little beanies and their plaid shirts judging you for the like not enjoying chaos the way you should enjoy chaos. And I love that about them, that there's these weird hipsters of chaos.
I didn't even know that. That's hilarious. I love that too. Are the Seraphon still from space? Are they still space dinosaurs, or are they kind of retcon that out?
Yes, they are. They did they did a really good job with their lore in carrying them. So they are the original lizard folk from fantasy. Basically, in fantasy, when the end times happened and everything was going to hell, the lizard men were just like, you know what, screw this. We kept this continent chaos free for so long, and then all you human folk came along and ruined everything. We're going to leave in our spaceships. And everyone was like, what? And it's like, yeah, turns out their temples were spaceships. So they just flew off into the sky and left while the world blew up, and left everyone else on their own. And they had been traveling for millennia just in space until they found Draconith, the god beast that is like the dragon god beast in Sigmar. And they're like, hey, we're dinosaurs, kind of like dragons. And they're like, yeah, I kind of like dinosaurs too. And they became buddies. And then they just hung out in Azure. And then when Sigmar came along, eventually after a while, Draconith was like, oh, also there's these weird lizard people that have been chilling here with me for like millennia. And so they're in this weird spot where they only now, in kind of like the era of the beast, they're starting to what they're called coalescing in the mortal realms. Before that, they basically couldn't acclimate to the mortal realms. So only the Slan, through their magic, could get down to the mortal realms, and they would be there. But then they were so powerful with their magic, they would just be like, okay, I remember what my army looked like and what they did. And so they would basically remember them into existence. And that was how they would fight as an army, is it would be one actual Slan, and the rest of his army was just willed into existence. And so now they're starting to like basically acclimatize special Seraphon that are coalesced in the realms, and that's what they're big in the game. They have the Realm Shaper engine, which is what's doing that. It's basically the planets or the different realms in order to make them adaptable or habitable for the Seraphon to actually now exist there. So you can play, when you play Seraphon, you can play as the Starborn, which is still the ones that are kind of stuck up in the ships, but they just get remembered onto the earth by their Slan. Or you can play as the Coalesced, which are the ones that are kind of like colonizing the mortal realms and starting to come back there. So they're really cool. Like, I absolutely love them.
I'm so glad that we have an Age of Sigmar expert here with us. Because
100%.
as Dan's been talking, I've been like browsing the web store, like, what the fuck is a realm shaper engine? Let's go look at this. Holy shit! And then I'm seeing other stuff, and I'm like, damn, I didn't know that the Beasts of Chaos have the coolest endless spell in that that boar thing. All right, the question now goes to Aiden. And in case you've forgotten the question, it's just tell me your faction. Like, what is the coolest aspect of your faction? Who's someone that someone's AOS curious, and they're like, oh man, I think that Soulblight's kind of cool, or cities are cool, or whatever. It can be lore, it can be art, it can be stories, and you can even include game mechanics if it relates to one of those. Although this discussion is not supposed to be just game mechanic focused. Aiden, you're up.
Okay, so I'll tell you what drew me to Soulblight. I think one of the things that Soulblight gets to do that not a lot of other factions in the game, or even 40k for that matter, get to do, is flexibility of flavor. I'm a big guy when it comes to culture in the kind of force you're presenting. Like coming from Guard, you have those diehard players who make their own Vestroians or whatever, and spend all this money and time kit bashing or whatever to create the culture that they want for their force. And I think Soulblight does that just by virtue of being kind of a carryover from Vampire Counts and being all of these like more general horror tropes. The Age of Sigmar has kind of adapted that, I think, into, hey, are you the kind of person that wants, like the royal court aristocracy side of vampires, and you want like maybe Neferata with a bunch of blood knights who look nice and royal with a bunch of skeletons like running under them. That's cool. Buy those models, paint those models. You have a different flavor than, say, like a Verkos army player who wants Chadakar and a bunch of wolves and zombies and more of a bestial side, more of a less of a clean aesthetic. And that's going to be different than, if you want to play Manfred and have like Vargeis and fell bats and direwolves and all of these, dark creatures of the night. That is available to you without having to pick up a sculpting tool or anything like that. Like you can instantly get into whatever flavor of the faction that you want. You don't have to make concessions. That's right.
Now, is there anything about the Soulblade that transitions to tabletop stuff where you're like, this army is how I sexually identify in a dice game?
To touch on what I just said, or just in general?
Yeah, does it touch on that mechanic wise? Like, if you can build it your way,
absolutely.
Like, if you can Burger King your Soulblight graveyards onto the tabletop, like, what works for you?
Yeah, and that's one of the cool things is, and maybe it's just because they happen to be good now. But if I wanted to play, the Neferata army, right? I have the Legion of Blood subfaction, and instead of being like, here are 4 subfactions or 5 subfactions, pick the hero that corresponds with that subfaction, and then take whatever is good. Soulblight really rewards you for being like, I want to play a Legion of Night army, or a Legion of Blood army rather. All of the models that happen to fit into that, I can take without feeling bad. Same thing with Verko. Same thing with, what is it called? Avangori, the more like mutated monster side of that. The rules really hold up what you want to do, and what kind of horror tropes you gravitate to.
To talk about Lumineth for a second, because that's the army I'm going to get into. You know what? As I decided to get into the Age of Sigmar, it was actually like just a wicked deal on an army. And there was a couple factions I was kind of drawn to. Ironically, they were all Order factions. I was kind of curious about Age of Sigmar for the Soulblight, but I don't want to paint that many zombies. I don't love painting Grimdark. I don't think my style is often a bit more clean, and I don't know if you can make like the undead, maybe the Blood Knights, I guess. But like, I still think you need skeletons and zombies, and so the painting definitely took an aspect into that. But I ended up doing the Lumineth, and the more I read about them, the more I loved them. I didn't love at first some of their models, and I was like, man, those helmets are goofy. But as I've been assembling them and looking at them and looking at them and looking at them and looking at them, you start seeing how just well designed they are. Similar to what you're saying about Soulblight, that within this faction we have multiple sub-factions, and I think that if you look at like the Goonhammer competitive innovations, that one of them is going to be mechanically better than the other right now in the context of everything else. But none of them are better on their own. And like, I have a lot of experience playing game systems. I've won tournaments in multiple different game systems, And when I look at all the different factions you can build within the Lumineth, like the Burger King Soulblight Build Your Way, it's you can play any of them. So it kind of like is what appeals to you. And when I look at Lumineth, and why I think someone should play them is that they can still do that. But now you're not playing dirty undead people. You're playing, elf e-girls or whatever your elf faction of choice is. And I love how they've written that into that. I love Warhammer Fantasy, and I love the rank and file aspect. And Lumineth actually rewards you for playing rank and file with a special rule called Shining Company. And if all your dudes are pretty much in rank and file, touching the base of 2 other guys, you get a bonus. You get -1 to be hit. And I think that is such an elf thing to do. If we look at fantasy settings where they're supposed to be like a bit more elite, they're usually more well-trained, they're exceptionally martial. And here we have like a very well-disciplined military fighting force who's marching in perfect lockstep. If you were to watch them or listen to them, you would hear not a foot out of place. And that's kind of reflected on the tabletop with a rule that makes sense. And that's cool. I did think about getting into the Wood Elves, the Sylvaneth. And I think that they also have a similar mechanic where they get to, in the history of Wood Elves, they've always been a hit and run mechanic where you're not as much playing like that rush to the center. And it seems like, from a brief cursory outside glance, that they do want to be hit and run. They want to hit you and they want to go back to their forest and teleport magically to another forest and then come at you from a different angle. Unless I've totally got them wrong. But as we're kind of bleeding into game mechanics now, I'd actually like to swap the conversation over to game mechanics and spend the next little bit talking about that. Because as I've been browsing through the core rules, the general handbooks, my individual... It's not called the Codex, Daniel. What's it called? A War Scroll?
Battle Tome.
A Battle Tome?
Yeah.
What I've been seeing is that they're just so well written. Like, it doesn't seem like we need to have, one battle tome to rule them all. And I know that some are overperforming others if we look at, competitive ways of playing the game where you spam 5 of one unit or whatever else. But it just looks and feels so well written. And I strongly feel that it is just the game I wish 40k was. I played Techless the other game. If you played a Techless equivalent in 40k, he'd be gone turn 1 if you lost that initiative roll. But AOS isn't built like that. You get to bring your cool models and you get to play with them, and they all do bullshit, and that seems fucking really cool. So, today I want to talk about specifically a couple of the rules that I think are just really cool and why you should get into the game because of it. And the first rule is the double turn mechanic. So for those of you who are new to AOS or unfamiliar with the system, like 40k, we have a roll for initiative. And, you can choose to be the attacker or the defender. In the current season, whoever finishes their deployment first, so whoever you alternate dropping models, like I put a unit of spearmen down, you put some swordsmen down, I put something down, you put your dinosaur down. Whoever finishes deploying their army first gets to choose whether they want to go first or go second. So there's a lot of strategy in determining how many drops do you want, what information do I want to give my opponent. Old school fantasy was won or lost in deployment. If their big block was there and you had a way to counter that, you would wait till they dropped that to drop yours, and then you would win the game. Age of Sigmar changes that, because you want to, you don't want to give your opponent all your information, but if you don't put enough down, they're going to take the turn away from you, and they can put you in a disadvantaged position. Age of Sigmar does something else that I think is the coolest game mechanic ever, that no one looking at the system would say is a good mechanic. And that is the possibility for a double turn. Every single turn of the game, after that first one, is a dice off. You roll a d6, and whoever rolls higher gets to choose. Now, many players looking at the system can look at that and say, well, if you go second turn 1, you could go first turn 2, and have 2 turns in a row. And that's true. That is theoretically possible. But if we look at 40k, or Infinity, or Warhammer Fantasy, or any other tabletop wargame, the roll to go first has been the most important roll of the game, period. Here, we have that roll 5 times. And every single time you make that roll, it's impactful. So, Dan, I want you to start maybe first on just your thoughts about the double turn mechanic. What's your experience with it? Do you think that it's a good mechanic? Do you think that it is game defining? If we roll into Age of Sigmar 4th edition next summer, do you hope that they keep it? Do you hope that it should go away? Just how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I like, to me, it's fundamental to the system. Like, if it ever goes away, it would feel weird to me at this point. The game is so built around that double turn mechanic, and it's a thing that, yeah, when you come in from a different game system that is used to, like, turn orders staying the same, it can be super punishing at first. And it will, like, when you're not used to it, it's either going to be super rewarding or super punishing, and it's going to be nowhere in between, because either you get the turns when you need them and it's rewarded you, or you get the turns that you don't need, or when you don't need them and it just punishes you. But when you learn the system and you learn how much back and forth there is within each turn anyways, you realize that the double turn mechanic isn't as detrimental as it first seems, like, especially if you're coming from 40k. Like, if you put the double turn mechanic into 40k, holy crap, that would wreck that game completely. Because you have alternating fight phases. No one ever has, I'll have all my guys fight first and then you fight. It's always a trade-off. So if a smart player plans for it, the double turn can be, yeah, it can be really helpful in a crunch moment, but it's also, if you plan for it and you're prepared, like a proper kind of general should be, and you don't get that double turn, or you get double turned, you've prepared for it. Like, you've set yourself up to take that hit, or you know which battles to make. Like, the game, tabletop games are always all about making your opponent make choices. The more choices you make, the harder the game is going to be for them to win. And so you just have to get smart with where you place units. You have to get smart with using things like the redeploy command, which is incredible. One of my favorite commands in the game.
I'm not sure if you're aware, Dan. There's an Eldar stratagem in Warhammer 40k, which is essentially redeploy, and it has been called the strongest stratagem ever printed. Okay? They're the only faction that gets to make a movement in someone else's movement turn. But in Sigmar, every army in the game gets the ability, and it creates such counterplay.
Yeah. I've won games just by getting good redeploys and getting smart redeploys, where that smart redeploy at the right time, getting the right distance that I need, and moving in the right way to, like, make sure that I've threatened an opponent with something else.
Can you explain what a redeploy is for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with it?
So basically, the redeploy is a generic, if you're used to 40k, it would be a generic stratagem. In Sigmar, it's called a command ability. So anytime basically a unit moves within 9 inches of your units, you can spend a command point to redeploy them, which means you roll a d6 and move them that many inches in a way that will move you further away from that opponent. So you can't move towards them. There's certain little caveats that make it a little bit more difficult. You have to either have a hero nearby, or you need to have a commander in your squad. So some squads can issue the command to themselves if they have a commander in the squad, and other squads can't. So, like, zombies can't issue commands to themselves. I'm pretty sure, right, Aiden? Zombies can't?
No, they can't. Skeletons can, but zombies can't.
Yeah. So there's certain units that are, like, the more mindless units, or, like, animalistic units that can't issue commands to themselves. But that can really change the outcome of a game and the outcome of a movement phase. You have just this way more interactivity between turns. Like, you have way less sitting time during turns. There's just more going on between both players in each player's turn. So as long as you're planning for that double turn, it's not nearly as harsh as it can be. It's still clutch when you get it. Like, it's great when you are able to get it, and it's super helpful. But it's the same thing as getting off all the charges that you needed in 40k. Like, if you get off 4 out of 4 charges, that's clutch. That's great. But if you don't, then it's like you should still need to plan for that.
Aiden, your thoughts on, the double turn mechanic? Like, coming into the game, was it something where you're like, "Fuck yeah, this is cool"? Are you gonna flip a table the first time you get double turned and lose because of it? Like, what are your thoughts and feelings?
So I think I don't know if we mentioned yet, but Arthur and I played our first full 2,000 point game of Age of Sigmar on Thursday. And yeah, we didn't encounter that until turn 4, I believe. Yeah, about around 4. And so it wasn't really big for us. And I'm glad it wasn't for our intro game because we got to get, a lot on our minds, right? But this conversation makes me wonder a few things. Like, I don't think 40K could ever be restructured to support a double turn, but I don't know if it could ever be restructured to, or I think it could be restructured to make redeploy like transfer over to 40K. And I wonder how that would change the game.
Mm-hmm.
As far as how, like, we didn't do redeploy once in our game, mostly because it was, maybe you did. Okay, yeah. So Arthur did.
How to get away from those fucking direwolves who got me anyways.
Yeah, launch them across the board. I think it's amazing. I think that the two metagames that are in like under the glass kind of the game, in that, if you have less drops in your army, you take priority, and that's going to determine on the first battle round, I should say, and that's going to determine the entire game, including like what your chances are for double turning. That is super cool to me. That we have these more complex list building systems that reward that kind of higher tier play, as well as like triumphs, which I think are less important. But that's if you have less points in your army than your opponent by 5 or 10 or 100 or whatever. I'm curious. Yeah, I want to know how bad it feels after it actually happens to me on turn 2 and 3 or whatever. If I get double turned, or how little I'm going to care. I will say that I think that it makes the game much more competitive as a whole, and I think that casual players going into the game are like, that's probably why there's a mass
How can that make it a more competitive game? That's what every single player listening to you right now is going to think. How can that make it a more competitive game if it's a random chance?
Because you have to. So when you're playing 40K or another war game, you roll your first dice. You say, okay, cool. Like or even before that, you're going to deploy in a way that's going to benefit whether or not you go first or go second. You're going to be like, okay, I have a plan for this. I have a plan for that, right? And every battle round after that, up until your 5th, is kind of preset by that first deployment decision. The reason why that kind of has a cap is, well, if you and your player both, or your opponent both know loosely how to deploy and how to like play out your battle rounds or whatever, the game more or less that was going to happens anyways. Like, you're going to have dice rolls where you spike or you don't do so well, but that's ultimately up to your to the way you're interacting with your opponent. In
right, players playing in an optimal position. It's becomes a trading game. War spiders go here, you kill them. This unit goes there, you kill them. And because I'm going second, I control this objective at the end of the game, and I win 97 to 76.
Right, and in AOS, it's still like, you still have a little bit of that, but introducing that chance for, you need to plan, because maybe, 2 battle rounds ahead, what are you going to do if you just get double turned, right? That adds so much more complexity to decision making in the early game and where you're positioning models. Because if you have a unit that's like, oh, I'm gonna dedicate this amount of points to a flank. Well, if you get double turned and you don't have like the resources to support that, you can just lose the game on that alone, right? And to the credit of the people who come to AOS, because it is, more of a quote unquote hobby game and a little more casual, quote unquote, understand that it really isn't. You can play that way, like any game. You can play however you like, provided you have the people to play with that'll play with you that way. But if you're looking for complexity competitively, I think that this system of priority rolls and double turning 100% rewards that, like, giga brain 10,000 IQ positioning.
Playing 5D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wonder if that only works because of in tandem with what Dan was mentioning earlier on the fight phase. And Dan also talked about the command phase too. Well, the hero phase, but it gives you command points, which you can then do. So for any of the Age of Sigmar curious or faithful, or maybe new players getting into it who are listening right now, during your hero phase, at the start of the very first hero phase of every turn, you both get command points. And the player who's going second that turn gets an additional. Now, there are some ways to get like 1 or 2 more here or there, depending on the way you structure your army or what characters you have. But like they're a pretty scarce resource. And they would provide significant buffs that are the same. Every army has roughly the same action, barring some unique hero things that you're going to use. And they are like what, +1 to hit, +1 save. You can maybe heal some wounds on a character. But the +1 to hit and the +1 save are so game changing, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan.
Yeah.
And it also makes it
using the
so
+1 to
interactive.
hit.
It makes it so interactive. Someone's coming at you, and you have to make decisions. Are you going to save that command point to redeploy, so maybe you make their charge harder to get off? Or are you going to accept that those fucking dire wolves are going to get in on your stupid archers? And do you save that to make your armor better?
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things I'm noticing about this game is that the AP system, and this is late in an edition. Every tome except for Flesh Eaters is out?
Yeah, every tome except for Flesh Eaters.
And whatever new tome they're going to release, maybe that's Cities of Sigmar, I guess, that's in the range.
Yeah.
And the AP system has not gone wild. AP 0 is common. AP 1 is uncommon. And like the data sheets I'm looking at, nothing has AP 2. And I'm sure that there is things, but like it seems like it's quite rare. And like for things to have AP 3 or AP 4, like or I guess in Sigmar terms we're calling that Ren 1 or Ren 2 or Ren -1.
Yeah.
It's rare, right? Like, so it makes these command point systems really worth it and interactive.
And to that, we have a lot more wounds being lost because the average save, I think, on most things is like at a 4 or 5. Like you'll have, centerpiece models like Indrasta or whatever who are maybe on a 3 or something, but for the most part, it's super high. So we have a lot of interaction. You're not going to deal with the situation where, someone's popping all out defense and then you're sitting there, your entire army trying to chip off at a Gargant or something, and nothing happens, right? You have a lot of interaction. The game feels like it's moving forward because of these smaller rend values. It's not as feels bad, but higher saves.
But also, like,
and
Dan,
barely any invuln saves.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan, what is the most common like dice roll in Sigmar? In Warhammer 40k, it's a 3-up. Everything has a 3-up, and the game is balanced around the 3-up. What is it for Sigmar?
Probably 4, honestly, I would say. Like, your average troops are, like, hit on 4, wound on 4. And if one of them is a 3, the other one's usually a 4. It's really hard to find units that are hitting and wounding on both 3s.
Right. Like, these are our elite units.
Yeah. Yeah, and even your elite units, it's like, lots of the Stormcast, I think, are still even then like hitting on 3s, wounding on 4s or something, or vice versa. And those are some of your most elite. So it's rare to get things that are like hitting on 2s, wounded on 2s. Like it takes a lot to get there, or it takes a special model to get there.
I think one of the ways that Age of Sigmar has counterbalanced this, and it's a way that in which 40k I think enacted poorly, is the mortal wounds mechanic. Age of Sigmar did it first. I think that they've done it best. And a mortal wound is the same as 40k. You're not taking a save, although you can take, your feel no pain or your ward save, as it's called in Sigmar. And those seem like there is a fair amount of those running around. But I think it's almost as a counterbalance. Am I wrong?
It feels like ward's almost like the substitute for invulnerable saves. That's what it feels like looking through data sheets. Because it has to because invulnerable saves in AOS, wouldn't matter if everything, like you say, is at a 0-1 or like in rare cases a 2 or 3. This is kind of your way around that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then they have kind of like the invulnerable saves that exist in Sigmar they don't have a universal name for them, but typically the way they usually work is like the Night Haunts, where their save factor can never be modified. So it can either be negatively or positively. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, so you don't get any positives to your save, but you don't get any negatives to your save. So it's like
still
awesome
taking mortals if they come at you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many mortals in Sigmar. Like everyone is throwing mortals out.
And I think that when we talk about like, the armor system here and like the lethality of the game, when you look at it on a whole, that the mortals aren't as oppressive as everyone made it out to seem. Oh, you're going to play Sigmar? Fucking mortals everywhere and the double turn, right? Mechanically, it seems fine coming from a very competitive tournament player from Warhammer. As we close out our podcast, there's about 2 more things here I want to talk about. The final roundtable of our discussion here is, what is your favorite like mechanical part about the rules? If there's one thing that you want to be like, this is the creme de la creme about Age of Sigmar, what is it? I'll go first to give you guys the chance to think about that. I love the spell phase. So I think that Warhammer Fantasy actually did the spell phase the best between Fantasy and 40k, because you got dice and there was this interactive part. Like the defending player always could stop like 1 spell, maybe 2, and then maybe more depending on if they had certain levels of wizards. So you had to play a game of like, all right, like how can I get the minimum to cast this to force some of your dice so we can get the stuff I really want out. Sometimes it was hard because for vampires there was a couple spells you needed to stop, but there was other spells you wanted to stop, and so it really was a game. For 40k recently, there is no spell phase anymore. It's gone. There's almost no interactivity in it. But for Sigmar, it seems like there's still that you have wizards and you're going to get powers off, but the deny range is 30 inches, and you can pretty much always have the chance to deny. And they just introduced new mechanics with this new season where you get an extra dice if you have a primal, an Andor and Locust. And so it really gives you a chance, like, oh, they got a Hoarfrost coming up. That's a really powerful spell. Absolutely not, you're not getting it off. And only one caster probably has that spell. So it seems like it's just really, really super interactive. And I think in any game like this, interactive is what makes it best. Rock, paper, scissors, whoever wants it can get it. What is your favorite mechanical part of this game?
You can go ahead, Dan.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth. Like, the spells are my favorite, which is I don't really have with my Beasts of Chaos that much, but like my Seraphon, it's just like I live and die in the hero phase. With my Seraphon, it's just like, no, I just want to do all the spells all the time. Just wild crap is going off. Like, we're just sending comets at people. We're slowing time down. We're making people fly. Like, I just love that wild craziness. But I also love the things like a lot of the flavor rules really make me happy about the game. Like that they found a way to make summoning work, because there are so many armies in Sigmar that get free units, and that seems insane. Like, as a 40k player, if you're coming into Sigmar and you're like, what, these guys just get a full greater demon for free because I've just been punching you, and that's what you want me to do, is like, if I punch you more, you get more demons? That's crazy. And it works, it balances. Like, they found a way to make that work where it's not oppressive. Like, the armies that have summoning units are not the ones that are constantly at the top of the meta. Like, they found a way to let armies be fluffy while not being oppressive. And there will be times where they do become oppressive. Like, shooting for a while was pretty oppressive, but then they brought in the Seasons of War, and the Seasons of War really brought down the shooting as the meta game. And now magic is the thing that's ruling the roost. But even then, it can get brought down because it has this kind of like give-take mechanic with this new season, where it's like, yeah, you can throw out more dice to get off your really good spells, but also if you roll any doubles, your wizard blows up. Like, it's a really nice way to balance things out. And I just love that about the game, that there's such really crazy fluffy rules. Like, pink horrors. That's probably my favorite thing about the game. The fact that you kill pink horrors and they split, and you kill blue horrors and they split. And that's what I want from them. Like, that's the most Zinchian thing to have happen in their army, is just like, you're trying to kill this thing and it's not really that deadly, but it just won't go away. It just keeps multiplying. Is so fun. Yeah, there's just like so many ridiculous characters, rules, and mechanics that work. They are fun and they work. They don't feel oppressive.
Aiden, your favorite, mechanical rules part of Age of Sigmar.
All right. Well, I'll jump off kind of what Dan's saying. I think you can definitely feel the top-down design in AOS. You have, like, for example, the primal dice thing. Like, you know that somebody sitting in the room there wasn't going, "Hey, how do we make spellcasting better?" They were thinking, "Hey, how do we, we're in Gur, we have, all this wild bestial magic or whatever. What mechanic can we make that supports this ability, right?" And it sounds like duh, right? But if you look at a lot of what 40K does, that's for sure not what it is, right? Like you'll have like, I remember, like, let's use the Octarius season or whatever it was called way back when. The most flavorful thing that pack did was rename the salvage data scry action to retrieve Octarius data. Like, that was the most flavorful thing they did, right? And it feels like, because they wanted mechanics first, and they were kind of going to build off what they loosely wanted for story. Everything here feels like, they started with the story. They started, what do we want players to feel when they're doing this? And then they wrote rules to kind of make that happen, right? We have, like, to draw an analogy between my two armies here. Guard, right? You'll have your 4 data sheets, your 4 infantry data sheets that all represent, like, the different cultures. You have Deathcore Krieg, you have Cadia, right? And then they'll change around some, like, rules, like, Cadians, have sticky objectives, and then Krieg, if they're less than full strength, they get some bonuses, right? And that's cool. But in a game of 40K, I can change out those two and barely feel anything. Whereas if I'm playing Soulblight, if I take 100 skeletons, my game is going to look way different than if I take 100 or maybe 80 zombies and then, like, a grave cart and a necromancer. If I make these decisions in list building, I'm going to get the feeling that I want out of those units versus, 40K, where you're taking what's good. You're taking what's good, not necessarily what you want out of it, right? Like my Ursula Creed giving an order to whatever, like a Tempesta Scion, it might never ever happen in lore, but that doesn't matter because it might be the best combination at the time. It feels like here everything was written where you want necromancers and grave carts and all these, like, different things. We're like, how do we make them work together? And then they wrote rules for that.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like that's what they're going for. When I look at Lumineth, it's like, if you want to play the Stone Temple, it all works together. And you know what? You get rewarded for playing what looks like a narrative army. I think maybe sometimes the narrative players are onto something. Like, regardless of whether you see yourself as more of a competitive player or a narrative player, like you said, it looks kind of goofy to watch Ursula Creed order some Tempesta Skyans around and they do their bullshit. It would make sense for Ursula Creed to order Cadians around. And I think that's what Age of Sigmar reinforces you to do. As we close out today, for anyone listening, I really want to encourage you to sign up for that slow grow. For anyone who's, like, even just a little bit curious, a Vanguard box almost gets you to 750. You buy 2, you're halfway there. You fill in with the other models you need. You got a full army, and you can play a game. And I promise you will have fun playing this game. You can bring the coolest models on the tabletop, and that shit's not going to get blown up turn 1. You're going to get a few turns at them, and it's just such an awesome game. And there are so many closet AOS gamers that are coming out now, so that's great. Please sign up for the slow grow if you're even a little bit curious. We got some awesome people in there. We're at 25. I want to see us get to 40. And if we get a little bit more support for that, we're going to be able to throw a little bit more support back at the community. We're going to be able to run some more events. And then, we have a great thing. So sign up for that. And as we close out today, I just wanted to throw out a little bit of, like, what you should check out. So what is the best AOS content on the web? I discovered there's a battle report place called Season of War. It has been the best battle report I've ever seen. They're like a 30-minute thing. I think they learned a bit from Play on Tabletop. But rather than do the minute-by-minute section during the turn, they fast forward it, and they have this awesome narrator who kind of sounds a little bit to me like the narrator from Baldur's Gate 3 or Divinity 2, who narrates what goes on. And the best part is, she's a bit cheeky. I watched a Lumineth game where Teclis did something, and she's like, fucking Teclis. And I think everyone felt that at the moment. He put out, like, 20 mortal wounds with his stuff. Everyone was thinking fucking Teclis. She went out and said it, and it was really fun. But she does that for everything. So you should check out Season of War on YouTube. I'll throw it over to Aiden first. What Age of Sigmar content on the web might you suggest someone take a look at, and then we'll throw it at Daniel before we wrap up for the night.
Yeah, so I think Vince Venturella is, Arthur and I are both fans. He's primarily a hobby YouTuber. If you need to see, how to do shading metallics or whatever, right? He has a video for it. But more specifically with AOS, he does a podcast. I don't know the name of it.
Warhammer Weekly.
Warhammer Weekly. Thank you very much. Where he touches on new rules, like how they, like whether or not they're good, whether or not they're terrible. He touches on little hobby things. It's a nice overall podcast to kind of engross yourself into what it's like to be somebody who regularly plays AOS. And I think that's very valuable. Somebody who is just coming into it. It certainly has been for myself. And I think if you are a competitive head like myself or Arthur, I'm going to shout out Stormkeep. So I came across these guys on accident the other week. And they provide something that I don't think very much else on YouTube has, which is like a super crunchy look at AOS, specifically through the lens of Stormcast Eternals, which I don't play, but listening to them talk about why certain units in Stormcast are good, why certain lists are good, what fits the meta or whatever, gives me enough context as a competitive player to form my own opinions about my armies through that lens, right? We don't have a lot of that. So if you have a chance, pop up one of their podcasts. It doesn't really matter about what, if it's like loosely interesting to you, and maybe you'll learn something.
Daniel, some Age of Sigmar content on the web. If you could recommend anyone for someone who's new getting into Age of Sigmar, or returning, or someone that everyone should know about, who are you throwing out there?
Well, I'm going to be self-serving at first and say check out Reforged, the comic that I do for Age of Sigmar on warhammercommunity.com. So there's that to check out. Gives you a glimpse at what its life is like in kind of the mortal realms, especially for the average person. But on top of that, I would put out, especially for lore, 2+ Tough on YouTube. Really enjoy his videos. He does a great job of talking about kind of doing summaries on the different lore, and he goes over everything, all the way from like the Age of Myth to the Age of Chaos to our current storyline, and he does a really great job of covering everything. And he works with Goonhammer now, and other than that, Top Tactics has finally jumped onto Age of Sigmar, and I've always enjoyed their content. And they've been doing a really good job, especially if you start from the beginning. There's not many videos in their Age of Sigmar catalog. So if you're a new player, it's kind of nice to watch them play, especially if you're a new player who enjoys competitive things, but also having fun. Because the majority of the tabletop crew is learning Age of Sigmar. There's basically one guy in the crew that knew Age of Sigmar before they started kind of like really doing battle reports on it. And so it's neat to see them slowly progress and learn the game and learn the different mechanics. And the nice thing is when they start, they don't start using all of the rules. They kind of do it like most people would do with learning the game, is they start simple and then work their way up. Plus their armies are gorgeous because they're all painted by, I forget his name, but Fletcher does an incredible job. So they're gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous armies. So yeah, those would be my recommendations.
I think you're muted, Arthur, if you're there.
Yeah.
No! I was actually just shouting out Dan here. He said check out his Reforged, but he's got a bunch of other content, and I believe you can find him pretty much anywhere on the socials that exist by searching Smash Head Studios. And he's got some really cool stuff, and he takes commissions, I think, for some art here and there. So, an incredibly talented individual who we're very fortunate to have here. I also want to thank our Patreon, so thank you, Chris, Ed, Frederick, Dustin, and Tyler for supporting Trident Wargaming Podcast. You help us put the lights on and pay the bills. We are looking in the future to add some Patreon perks. Some things like maybe Patreons get first chance to sign up at our events, which sell out like that. And please, if you can support us on Patreon, it really helps. Look out for more information for the Trident stuff for our Christmas social. Okay, we got a winter event that's kind of open to anyone. There will be tickets for it. We have a limited amount of spaces, but it's the great chance to, have a beer with some community members. You can bring the family out. I know my wife's coming. You can maybe roll some dice. I think we're going to do maybe a small bit swap. And we're going to do something for donations too. So I think we're going to take in some maybe stuff for the food bank. So it's a chance to kind of give back to those in need, especially during that time of year. We have Hallowtide coming up. So our Halloween themed Warhammer event. This time it's 40k. And we got a really cool chance to try out a slightly different type of event in Highlander, which I am incredibly excited about. And then come the new year, we got a lot of good stuff that I can't quite announce yet. So stay tuned for that. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, Dan and Aiden for coming on the podcast. And I will see you on the next one. Did you plug the Patreon? We need to plug the Patreon.